Michael Saylor's kind of laid out some bold predictions for Bitcoin. And I was actually funny. I was saying this at the 100K party, maybe to kind of like round it out, go back to the beginning. People were making predictions, and I was saying like, well, the nice thing about Bitcoin is that it's proven even the craziest predictions to be accurate, like given enough time. If you make a prediction about the Bitcoin price and you're wrong, you just have to wait.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm here with a very special guest, editor at Bitcoin Magazine and large Kraken, Rizzo. How are you doing today?
Happy to be here on a historic day.
Of course, you have a fantastic Twitter account, the Bitcoin Historian, which I follow rigorously. I would say thank you so much for putting out so much good content.
Yeah, happy to do it. I like to pay it forward. I know how hard it can be to get into Bitcoin, understand kind of who are the players, why is the Bitcoin culture as it is today. And I think history is just super important, right? My view is that Bitcoin is going to be this, new foundation for kind of the economy of the world. And I think, people in the future are going to have a lot of questions about how the technology came to be, why certain decisions will be made. And I think it's really important that we, understand kind of the people and events who shaped it. So my Twitter account is, based on that. Every day you get some updates of things that happened in the past, some bullish predictions from people who are right, some bearish predictions from people who are wrong. And then we throw in some sort of long threads there about legendary figures, and then I call them sort of the epic stories, right? People who lost hundreds of thousands of coins through all sorts of calamities, the Wild West stories from the pioneers who died along the trail to the west. So check it out. Yeah, Pete Rizzo on X, and you can go to BitcoinHistoryNewsletter.com and subscribe if you're interested in that kind of stuff.
Every now and then you tweet, 10 years ago with $1 you could buy X many Bitcoins. That's actually motivating. So I really enjoy.
Well, I think it's important, right? A lot of people, they look at the price today and they don't realize that Bitcoin was once worth nothing, right? That is actually a huge differentiator between Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, is that Bitcoin monetized through free market activity, right? So on today, January 3rd in 2009, there was no way to run the Bitcoin software. Bitcoin wasn't worth anything. Satoshi launches the blockchain. And, at the time, people who were mining, they were literally paying to use Bitcoin. They were actually spending electricity, buying electricity, running the software on their computer to mine Bitcoin. So, they were actually losing money on Bitcoin. And so, I think those little reminders, they're funny, right? Because they're crazy. A few days ago, I tweeted that, 15 years ago today, you could buy 150 Bitcoin for 10 cents. And, the thing is that was true. That's how worthless Bitcoin was. But, people had to decide that it had value. They began trading it. They built an economy. And I think that's really actually foundationally important to understanding, why Bitcoin is unique amongst all other cryptocurrencies, is that no other cryptocurrency has really had that, right? They've all sort of been priced and sold by creators. Those little reminders, they give me anxiety as well, right? I think about what I was doing in 2010 and should have been buying Bitcoin.
But I think in retrospective, we will be happy to say we bought, before Microsoft, before Apple, we bought under 100,000 comfortably, even 10,000 to be honest. But I think where we're going next is going to be quite exciting. So I do believe still early anyway. So
yeah, certainly a lot more to go. I've been shocked. I was just at the Michael Saylor 100K party in Miami, and I said this on the Bitcoin Magazine live stream. I think it's shocking to me. If you had told me in 2013, $100,000 Bitcoin, what would the world be like? I would have told you probably everybody's using Bitcoin. It's ingrained in commerce. Financial experts accept it and they understand it. It's integrated into the financial capitals of the world. And, how little of that has actually happened is actually pretty bullish in some ways, right? I think, 1 unit of the Bitcoin protocol, Satoshi, Bitcoin, whatever you want to call the smallest unit, is still, you can get 1,000 Bitcoin units for $1, right? The current prices, right? So in some ways, Bitcoin, still very affordable based on where we're going. Of course, the early legends, they were buying hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin and losing them in all sorts of creative ways. But I think we have a lot more to go. The Bitcoiners, to me, it's why I kind of went from journalism to being the historian role, is sort of, you realize that the Bitcoin people, the early Bitcoin people, they're going to have the money to reshape the world. I mean, some of the Bitcoiners were early. They're already among the world's wealthiest people. Satoshi, by some estimates, is probably within the top 20 wealthiest people in the world. Michael Saylor getting close, but a lot of other names, like people like Wences Caceres with like 6 figures worth of Bitcoin. I mean, you're talking about in 10 years time, I mean, they're going to be able to buy whole countries. They're going to be able to, reshape the world in kind of ways that, maybe they haven't even thought of. So it's funny to watch for me, like some of these people who some ways I kind of grew up with them. I covered their companies when they were struggling to raise money. They were struggling to get users. And now, yeah, they're going to be in a position, as we saw in the U.S. election in 2024, to move the power mechanisms of the world. And I think the fascinating parts of the story are probably yet to come.
Completely agree. And I wanted to ask you, how was the Andre K. Michael Saylor party? Because I've seen some of the coverage live, of course, but how was being there and speaking, of course, at the event?
Well, look, I always love doing the Bitcoin Magazine live streams. I think they're super fun. We had a lot of great guests on. Got to chat with TJ Miller, got to chat with old time Bitcoiners like Pierre Richard, who have done, kind of legend threads on, got to catch up with, early Bitcoiners, Trace Mayer, Wences Caceres, David Bailey, who, are pioneers that I looked up to coming into the space. And in some ways, it was just another party, right? I actually, funny story, but I took my brother there and it was his first Bitcoin event ever. Never been to a Bitcoin event. So he was just a pleb amongst, the Bitcoin royalty. And he went through several stages. He was kind of shocked and awed. He was like, "Oh, these are the people who I saw on Twitter taking pictures of Peter McCormick." And he's double fisting. He's drinking all this expensive alcohol and food. And then by the end of the night, he's just hungover and it's a regular party, right? Like, however expensive the party is, it's a regular party, right? You go home drunk, sober, alone, maybe with another person. There's only so many outcomes. So we went back to the hotel room. And that was pretty much it, right? So it was a great occasion. I think obviously great to see people and to celebrate, but as you noted, I think 100K is just another number. So,
do you believe the Trump pump, as everyone calls it, is priced in, or do you think? Because some people are saying, oh, as soon as Trump is going to take charge, January 20, I think it is in the US, then everything's going to drop because people are going to sell into the news. Do you think it's priced in, or do you think we still have leg to go into
no, I
2024?
think absolutely next year is going to be an on year for the Bitcoin and crypto markets. I'll give you several reasons. So one, the entire Bitcoin and crypto market, and again, the Bitcoin and crypto, depending on how you feel about it, is going to be deregulated. These companies that were offshore are going to come onshore. These companies that, people forget how restricted companies like Coinbase and Kraken and, Binance have been from serving U.S. customers. They're going to come onshore. They're going to be regulated. Some of them are going to go public. And they're going to advertise at a level that is probably consistent with major U.S. banks. You haven't seen that, but we quite simply haven't seen, sure, some billboards, some buses, some things like that. But, for the most part, most crypto exchanges have been largely prohibited from advertising and television and things like that. I think that's going to totally change almost overnight. And I think, the regulatory clarity that's going to bring is, also going to level the playing field. Like a lot of these kind of newer, more exotic cryptocurrencies, that's a very charitable way to describe them. They're going to be also advertised heavily to users. There's going to be a lot of adoption of those, I would imagine, a lot of bubbles and a lot of speculation. So I think the regulatory clarity, the marketing that's going to bring, the user acquisition that's going to come from that, it can't be priced in because we quite simply haven't seen that. And I think also the incumbents, we just saw the other day that Morgan Stanley's E-Trade is looking at adding Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. This is the largest financial trading platform in the US, has never integrated it. That's going to happen, that you're going to see that. Obviously there's the ETFs already, but it's just going to be on a level that you haven't seen. It's going to be accepted and become normal, right? It's going to kind of go along that step to normalization. And so, yeah, I think, can you put a price figure on that? No, but it's, the Bitcoins are scarce and everybody wants them. And, I just think that, we're going to have a frothy market next year. I agree with American HODL. He put out a prediction that he thinks that, the next Bitcoin crypto crash is going to be systemically important to U.S. markets. So I actually agree with that. I think that, we'll likely see a crash at the end of next year. Maybe a bit later. We always kind of see these big corrections, but this one will be, impactful to the U.S. economy and probably the world economy on a level we haven't seen. We got a little taste of it with FTX. Obviously, Sam Bankman-Fried in jail lost a lot of people a lot of money. Some of them have gotten the money back, but we haven't. That was still, crypto was kind of seen as something that you could cordon off from the financial system. I don't think that's going to be possible. And the other thing I will add is you're going to see, people think that the ETF is some kind of moat for Bitcoin. You're going to see at least 10 to 15 other ETFs. You're going to see Solana ETFs, XRP ETFs. You're going to see all those crypto ETFs packaged into, larger ETFs that like give you exposure. Like, so the financialization of those products. I mean, we saw Bitwise come out and they want to launch an ETF for Bitcoin treasury companies. So you're going to see all these things, right? You're just going to see people being able to buy exposure to the industry in ways that just we haven't seen before. So no, next year is going to be. This is going to be a story year for Bitcoin for sure.
You've been in Bitcoin since 2013, so you've seen a bunch of cycles coming in. Are you expecting the bull run, bear market, bull market 4-year cycle to be broken at some point, or do you think we will respect it?
Yeah, I think at some point, but I don't think yet. And I think there's some reasons for that. So I call myself a cycle maximalist. My base case is that every 4 years you're going to get a bull market. So my base case is we're coming into a bull market. I don't see any data to refute that. That was my base case last year. I didn't think we were in a bull market last year. I think the biggest thing that people misunderstand about the nature of bull markets within the Bitcoin and crypto space is that yes, the Bitcoin price was high last year, but you didn't see companies hire and spend. Like when companies hire and spend, that really is the engine of the bull market, and that's why last year you really saw an elevated Bitcoin price, but for the most part, companies in the industry were not spending and hiring. That is changing effective Trump coming into office. Is that those companies are spending, hiring, growing. They're competing against each other. They're competing against incumbents, and that acceleration is where you get the real bull market kind of, that's when you start kind of going exponential. As I said, a 5x move from here is $500,000. I think that, you'll see Bitcoin probably trade closer to $1 million this year than, zero. Right. So I think that, we're headed in that direction. The question is just how soon. And as we saw at the end of last year, things move fast, right? It's going to be a, probably like 10, 15-day period where things get kind of wild. And, but I think we're probably getting like the cycles I think are based on, I had a long conversation years ago with Barry Silbert about this from DCG. And he was really convinced, this would have been like 18, 19, that the cycles were over, that everyone understood that, Bitcoin was, programmatic, that it had halvings, it was limited supply. And I was like, that there's a peak saturation for like everybody knowing about Bitcoin. But I don't think we're close to it. We're getting closer. And the way that I would measure it is sort of like, okay, like who are the other bosses of people who could possibly get into Bitcoin and crypto stuff? Last cycle we saw major celebrities, major influencers, you saw, starting to get banks and financial institutions. Now you've got nation states potentially on the table. Like, what's higher than that? What's higher than Trump? Like the president of the United States and the free world essentially backing Bitcoin. Well, it's like the IMF, the UN, some of these kind of supra structures like the World Bank. But where do you go beyond that? There isn't like another level of of people beyond that, right? Like, so the world, there's like kind of layers to the world, right? You sort of had in 2009, 11, it was this little forum. And then by 2013, it was like kind of most of the internet, or like the tech internet. At 15, 16, it was, a little bit broader than that. And so with each cycle, you see it growing out. But I think like, once Bitcoin starts integrating into like the global superstructures. And again, that's a question whether, they'll adapt to Bitcoin or be kind of sort of eroded out. But, you're sort of getting to the limits of, there's not much more exposure. So I think like, my base case is I think we maybe got like one or two more cycles. Like I think including this one, like that, where like you see the same behavioral pattern. But then eventually, you'll hit some saturation point. The question is just when. And I think we're close. We're closer than we've ever been, but I don't think we're all the way there.
the previous cycles, we had retail impacting way more the price. I mean, okay, there's still an argument of who's buying the ETF because some of them are retail, but
It
all I'm
seems
saying,
like from the data that most of them are retail, right? It's like 80% or something like that.
exactly. Last I checked, it was something similar. So when people are saying retail is not here, I kind of disagree because they are just going through a different vehicle because maybe they don't want to have self-custody, whatever the reason might be, conveniency, whatever it is. I think retail is here, but also we've seen now companies, institutions, pension funds, potentially countries as using as strategic reserves. So like you said, players have been changing throughout the adoption. Like when a bunch of people are buying Bitcoin and it doubles, they'll probably want to sell it. But when a corporation or a pension funds does a move into storing their wealth, they're not going to probably care about the fact that it doubles. They're probably in for 10, maybe 20 years.
I just don't think the big blow off tops were like entirely retail driven. I think just the nature of, my view is that all market participants are somewhat similar, right? It depends on what kind of conviction you have. But for the most part, when you kind of get into this stuff and you're buying it for the first time, I mean, there were a lot of pensions last time around that they allocated, but they allocated to FTX, right? And so like they didn't work didn't work out super well for them. Obviously, they should have bought Bitcoin, but I think you're going to see similar stuff, right? I don't know, like when the price starts moving up, I think most even like old time Bitcoiners, right? So people from 13, 14, some of them are living off their coins now, right? So they don't work really anymore. So what they do is they, kind of sell Bitcoin kind of at these local tops, and then they use that to kind of pay for their life kind of, over the next 3 or 4 years. So I think you also have like older people within the Bitcoin space who, so you're talking about the different participants. Yes, the coins are going to change hands, but yeah, some of them are selling. Like there was a great data point on this on the Reddit forums, our Bitcoin earlier this year, where I posted some old chart from 2010. It was an old post, and it was a poll, and it said, how many Bitcoins do you have? And there was different ranges for them. And so the response on this poll that I posted was that all the new Bitcoiners were like, nobody had over 1,000 coins. That's ridiculous. They were all lying back then. And so this guy shows up on the forum, totally new Reddit account, burner account, and he replies to the thing, and he said, I responded to this poll, and he said, I have 5,000 Bitcoins. Like, here is a address cryptographically signed that I hold 500 Bitcoins. It's like, I can't access all my coins, but I can prove to you that I own a significant amount. Here's the proof. You could run it in a signature checker, right? So you could check whether this signature, was able to sign from the wallet and it validated. And I was able to connect with him via email after that, and he had a really interesting story. He was basically, saying, I have $500 million. I'm a guy, I have a wife, like a couple kids. I was into Bitcoin in 2011, 13. I got out of mining. I kept the Bitcoin. But my goal is to kind of, sell part of this stack off, move it into existing investments, and then, have money in my family for generations, right? I want to make sure that my family's secure. And he kind of saw Bitcoin as something that had kind of already peaked, or like it already happened. And I think most people don't want to admit this about some of the old time Bitcoiners, is that they're not all Michael Saylors, right? Like some of them are pretty pragmatic. Some of them, especially like the people who are in really early, you have to kind of think about it like, imagine you mine something on your computer and like you paid nothing for the stuff, like almost nothing. But like now, like if you have 10,000 Bitcoins, you have $1 billion. You have $1 billion that you got for, in some cases, I talked to this guy earlier this year. He saw that I was doing my emails. He reached out. He bought Bitcoins from people by like mailing them physical cash for Bitcoins. And in some cases, he bought a couple thousand Bitcoins for like $5, so, and he has like a probably north of $1 billion. And so their view of Bitcoin is going to be different than yours and I's, because, they, have this amount of capital at their disposal. And, I think that they're looking for opportunities to kind of turn that into real world wealth. The question then I think is, what do they do with it? And it's interesting to me, like how many of them have like a somewhat dissociated relationship with Bitcoin. Like they want to help, they want to kind of further Bitcoin. But in some ways, like, right, they have this like enormous amount of capital that they almost don't even know what to do with, right? Like imagine you had $1 billion, like how would you help Bitcoin? It's almost hard for them to even answer that. As I said, it'll be interesting to see what they do, because they have this ability now. And obviously with the election, I do think that was like a concrete example where they were like, okay, yes, it's worth it. We're going to put some money behind Trump's campaign to get political clarity in the US. And they did that, and they had a result in the world. And I think that's probably the forward direction for those guys. But it probably includes some amount of them putting their capital to use in some sort of interesting way.
I also do believe that the majority of people, they purchased Bitcoin in early days, quote 2010, even 11, they sold the majority of it. Like I can't even imagine holding on into 20,000 coin as soon as it doubles.
Some of them hold are still holding though. It's like
Yeah, but it's going to be a super small percentage of people. I mean, I would say, imagine you buy something and it goes from $1 to $10. I mean, you would sell some of it, not all of it. You will keep depending on how much you have, right?
the relevant analogy for that would be Marty Malmy, who's somebody that people probably know from the recent conference circuit. He's a Noster entrepreneur now, but he worked with Satoshi, like developing Bitcoin early on. He sold 50,000 Bitcoin to buy an apartment in like 2011, basically, for almost nothing. Has some coins still, but sold out. I do think that it's not, the thing is, it's not zero people. And let's just say it's under 1,000. Let's just say it's under 1,000, right? Well, that's 1,000 people economically motivated to change the world, and like they have the means to change the world in a way that, like, I mean, you're talking about like these people who are like literally unknown, who have as much disposable wealth as like a Bill Gates, right? That's there's one Bill Gates, and look what happened during the pandemic with like the pharmaceuticals and everything, the influence that he put on the world. Okay, so now let's just say even there's 100 people who have this amount of wealth, who are not Bill Gates, who are aligned with sort of a Bitcoin outlook on the world. It's what do they do with that? I think that'll play out over the next 10 years, right? There's a not too unknown Bitcoin, OG out there, and I was talking to him recently, and he was like, "Yeah, I'm looking for land. I want to start a country. Like I want to." Have a Bitcoin nation, and and it sounds crazy, but you could see that happen, right? You could see that happen in the not too distant future, and I think that kind of stuff would be wild.
I completely agree. I also believe there is a percentage of these people, they want to do something, they want to contribute, and they still have a ton of coins, right? Because depending on, maybe someone even found them, because it's funny when you think about it, but I believe that the ultimate winner is someone who actually mined Bitcoin 10 years ago, and all of a sudden they found an hard drive somewhere and there is like a ton of Bitcoins in there, because that would be the ultimate winning, because you were not tempted to sell, you didn't know you had them.
I talked to at the Sailor party that I thought had something interesting to say. He was like, it's not even the Bitcoin, and I was like, what do you mean it's not even the Bitcoin? He was like, do you know how many forks and like airdrops there were? He was like, just think about Bitcoin Cash. He's like, you know how much money he's like I made from selling Bitcoin Cash. He's just like, and then he's like, it's not even just Bitcoin Cash. There was Bitcoin Gold, there was Bytecoin. There was like 15 different forks, and then he was like, he rattled off like kind of all these examples, and I was like, I was like, wow, that's like, yeah, and so there's dividends, right? Like the and compound, like this wealth sort of compounds. But yeah, I mean, look, I think it'll be interesting, right? The other example is Roger Ver, who's kind of somebody people know from the old days, who at some points I think had like 400,000 coins. Though doesn't have that much anymore. But he's being sued by the U.S. government. We'll see what happens in that case if he's able to successfully defend that. Is sort of politically persecuted. So, I think there's also some of these individuals, that's the thing about individuals is you can have a target against you, right? So with Roger, I think, and it's been interesting to see the reaction, I think, amongst the Bitcoin community to Roger's situation. You can go to freeroger.org if you want to find out some more about Roger's particular case. Obviously, Roger has done and said things about Bitcoin that I don't agree with. I don't support his conclusions about the Bitcoin network. That said, he was a tremendous evangelist for Bitcoin in its early days, and probably doesn't deserve to spend the rest of his life in prison for trying to leave the United States. There's lots of stories, and as I said, I think the best Bitcoin history is yet to be written. There's a lot of great Bitcoin history, but some of the upcoming stuff I think is going to be pretty worthy.
This is one of the reasons why I do believe that Satoshi wanted to stay, he, she, they, them, whatever, anonymous, right? Because when no one knows who you are, well, it's impossible to have a target on your back. So it makes a lot of sense. Having talked about the cycles and the fact that there's going to be a crash at some point, I mean, do you play strategically these movements where you use a portion of your Bitcoin, you sell when we go up, and then you rebuy when we go down, or you just hodl?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I do that in up markets. I try to sell off a little bit of my portfolio kind of with each movement. Again, I don't have the benefit of being an early adopter. I was in 2013. The lowest price I saw was $50, but I didn't really start buying Bitcoin with any conviction until 2018. I've said this pretty publicly that until after the fork wars, I really didn't get Bitcoin. I didn't see any real difference between Bitcoin and the other kind of cryptocurrencies that were out there. I had a pretty low amount of confidence in the whole ecosystem at that time. 15, 16, that would have been like the worst bear market. I mean, people just thought the whole industry was over. You had kind of banks coming to like privatize the blockchain. VCs, who formerly they held big Michael Saylor type parties for everybody, wouldn't return anybody's calls, wouldn't return anybody's emails. I like to say I stuck around in Bitcoin, but that's only because nobody else would hire me, right? I had nowhere else to go, right? So I had to kind of stick around for the ride. You've had almost, we've had a lot of time to kind of sit with these things, and the way that I view it right now is that it's nice to get a little boost to your income, every so often. Hodling is great, but got a family. It's nice to live somewhere nice. You're not going to live in a shoebox your whole life, even if you're hodling. So yeah, I think it's important to kind of put some of that money. When I see people, I think take hodling a bit too seriously, right? You also have a quality of life. I think that it's good to maintain. And there's other ways to invest in the future, right? As I said, with like family, property, making sure others in your life have a good life or accounted for. I sell a small percentage of my overall portfolio. I mean, you're talking about, I don't even know how to quantify it, an extra couple expenditures here and there, to give you some breathing room. But yeah, I don't know. I think the people who are seriously strict on hodling and going all in on Bitcoin, you never want to put yourself in a situation where you don't have any cash on hand and you have to sell at a discount. So it's better to sell a little bit in the up markets than I know people who had to sell at 15K. You know, that's terrible. I wouldn't, if that Bitcoin is going to go to 100K next year, you don't want to say sell at 15K. So if you think that you're going to find yourself in that position, it's good to have breathing room. And I think I think we're fortunate to live in a time where Bitcoin is so volatile, and we can use that advantageously. And again, I'm not saying that people should sell their whole stack in order to kind of rebuy, take those kind of chances, but I don't think Bitcoin is going to get less volatile. I mean, if you look at the percentage declines, right? It's 2013, it's 82% peak to trough. 2017, it's 78%. 2021, it's 72%. So let's just assume that on a percentage basis, we keep improving by 6%. Okay, you're looking at a 66% drop, 60% drop. Peak to trough next time around, probably that's a big difference, right? And you have to spend money on things. Life happens, car accidents, floods, medical problems. Bitcoin doesn't help you with that.
And also, like you said, it doesn't make sense to have a lot of Bitcoins and live in a cave with no shoes on. I mean, there is a ton of memes, but I'm sure you've seen Michael Saylor house. He has a decent house, right?
Yeah, he lives in a $48 million house or something like that. I think they did the math, and it's with 4,800 Bitcoins or something. Somebody was doing the math at the party, and it's he's not schlepping it,
Exactly, but it makes sense. Like you said so well, you want to reflect your wealth into your lifestyle. Otherwise, what are you stacking for? So I think it makes sense. Do you diversify into anything else like gold, real estate, stock?
No, I'm not smart enough for that. I did do a couple stock trades this cycle for the first time. I bought GBTC when it was at a discount because it was just so obvious to me that was going to close, and I had a retirement account. So I did buy that and then liquidated that once they became the ETF. And I do now own MicroStrategy, though I have no significant intellectual reasoning for this. It's just that the vibes are good. People are shouting random things that I don't understand, and I'm not going to miss out on that boat just because I'm worrying about Bitcoin yield or I don't know. I think the MicroStrategy thing is really interesting because one of my things is I kind of analyze the Bitcoin culture, and I think that one of the fascinating things that's happened over the last year is you've had different groups. There's kind of this Bitcoin orthodoxy, right, which is this thing that has emerged that really wasn't there in the earlier days, right? But I think when people talk about Jimmy Song and Giacomo Zucco, and they kind of rebel against this Bitcoin culture. Well, what are they talking about? They're talking about there's this Bitcoin orthodoxy that says sort of like this is how you should use Bitcoin. Like Bitcoin is a tool, and like this is how you use it. And the interesting thing is, over the last year, I think we've seen really three groups that have come out, and they've traded against the orthodoxy, I would say. So they've basically done something that the orthodoxy says that you shouldn't do in order to bring Bitcoin to more people. And I think for the most part, like these groups have actually been pretty successful. And so the three groups are in order: the Bitcoin Season 2 crowd. So they are bringing kind of the crypto tokens and assets to Bitcoin in an attempt to get crypto users to switch to Bitcoin. They have been moderately to pretty successful. Bitcoin NFTs are now kind of on a category basis one of the largest in that space. They haven't won over everybody, but they've been somewhat successful. There's the MicroStrategy folks. They are essentially buying Bitcoin with leverage. They're borrowing money, or in Saylor's case, they're selling equity to raise money to buy Bitcoin, and then they're accumulating Bitcoin through a debt-based, credit-based process. You can say whether they're exploiting the system or they have some sort of positive intent in doing that, but suffice to say, from the Stefan Livera, Pierre Richard kind of view of, we want to eliminate these kind of debt-based credit systems. They're kind of taking advantage of this. They're bypassing this part of the orthodoxy, and they're saying, no, it's good if Bitcoin becomes systematically important for the stock market. Major companies own it. This is a way that they can take to accumulate large positions, so it's justified. They kind of justify what they're doing. And the last group, I think, that has been the most successful, and inarguably the most successful, is the Trump for Bitcoin folks. So, Bitcoin, this apolitical, non-political asset, probably delivered the election for Donald Trump. And so, well, how does that happen? Well, a group of Bitcoiners decided, hey, let's get rid of this non-political aspect. Let's forge an alliance with this political constituency in the U.S. that we think has a decent shot at winning the election. Let's get them on board with the industry by any means necessary. And I think I end with the last group because I think they were the most successful. And it's very clear that they were successful because the binary between a Kamala Harris presidency and a Trump presidency is like, on one hand, it's like $40,000 Bitcoin. All the companies are offshore. Another 4 years of Gary Gensler. And then the other thing is, $100,000 Bitcoin, probably going into the most bullish market. The United States potentially even buying hundreds of thousands, if not millions of coins. It's a pretty stark binary where you can see that, yes, because these people did something, even though Bitcoin is inevitable, even though we think that Bitcoin's properties are so good that it will win, these people accelerated this timeline. Inarguably. You can't even make an argument that they didn't. It would be so ridiculous for you to actually do that. I was looking at Giacomo's tweets yesterday. I love Giacomo, by the way. We're good friends. But he's like, my friends at Bitcoin Magazine who, got Trump, I give them credit for that. Why does he have to give us the credit for that? It was so inarguably successful, right? And I was present in some of those conversations with David Bailey early on, and I was like, this is you can do this, but this is, you're taking the chance, right? Like there's some people who are not going to like this. And myself personally, I'm a bit more liberal than most. I voted Republican for the first time this year, but that was a hard decision. I didn't necessarily think that it was going to happen. I still don't know what we're going to get from Donald, right? Is he going to be a perfect Bitcoiner? Probably not. But I think it's just so inarguable that they accelerated Bitcoin's timeline. And I think to a lesser extent, the MicroStrategy people and the Season 2 people, it's like, we can accelerate Bitcoin's timeline. You can. Like, you have power, you have agency. And I think that was a lot of the frustration out of 2021 and 2022, where there was this kind of feeling that like, oh, okay, like, Bitcoin's inevitable, but there's nothing we can do to like move it forward, right? Like we missed 100K during that cycle and people tried, but there wasn't really, I don't know. I felt like there was a big malaise, right? And then these groups kind of came out and they all tried different things. And I just think one of them was very successful. I think the other two will probably be pretty successful as well. But yeah, they are, to be pretty clear, like they are doing things that like are against the unwritten, Bitcoin rules. And I like to explain it that way because I think it makes it pretty clear. It's like you don't have to really abide by this sort of Bitcoin orthodoxy that tells you to do things in a certain way. And I think Michael Saylor kind of like going in his own direction. This is pretty new. Like Michael Saylor in 2020 and 2021, sure, he was buying Bitcoin with a public corporation, but like he was kind of saying the same thing as all the other Bitcoiners. That's kind of changed. Like Michael Saylor is he's on his own path. Like he's on his own warpath, and he's going to be successful or not. I don't get to make that decision. We'll see what happens. But he's kind of on a trajectory now that I think is much different than he was a few years ago. And so, I think it's exciting, right? I think we want to see people do that. I really take chances and kind of push Bitcoin forward. At least I do. I don't know. I find like the sort of more conservative elements of the Bitcoin culture, somewhat needlessly pedantic at times. It's sort of like the analogy I used to talking to Jimmy Song, because I loved his presentation in Lugano. He talked about like Bitcoin, sort of like the morals of Bitcoin. He went through all sort of like, the kind of, this is how, you should use Bitcoin and how I've learned Bitcoin. And I like, I think this is good information, right? If I was going to tell somebody who was going to be new to Bitcoin, like I would give them this advice. But is that Bitcoin? Like can that be Bitcoin? Right? Like you drive a car and there are rules to driving a car, but the car is not the rules for driving the car. Like those are two separate things. And I almost don't know what to do with the, kind of like very religious elements of Bitcoin who like, they're like, this is what Bitcoin is. And like any deviation from that, is not Bitcoin. And it's like, okay, well, is that, I mean, they're following the software rules. I mean, there's like Michael Saylor is not changing the rules of Bitcoin. So, as long as he's abiding by the software rules, if you have a problem with that, I'm like, I don't know what to tell you, right? It's the same thing with the lesser extent with the Trump people as well, right? Like, I mean, they're not changing any of the software you're running on computers is exactly the same. So if you have a problem with what they're doing, then you have to go out and then orange pill your own constituent groups, right? So this is where I think like I have a little bit of issue with the the kind of I have a great sympathy for like the third world kind of developed world first kind of wing of the Bitcoin party that's like, no, we need to lift up the parts of the world that have been exploited by the fiat system, and like that's Bitcoin's intent. But I don't have anything else to say to them other than like, well, you have to be more successful than the Trump people. Like if that's what you want, I agree. I sympathize with that. I would also like that. I actually think that the best outcome for Bitcoin is that we move away from a U.S.-led, U.S.-dominated financial system. That has nothing to do with like the Bitcoin code. I can't force you to believe in that. I can't force that outcome. You're not guaranteed that outcome. Does the kind of Trump MicroStrategy direction like align us more with maintaining the U.S.-led global financial system under a new sort of Bitcoin banner? I think absolutely. I think Samson was interviewed at the 100K party and he said that he didn't believe that was the case. But I find that hard to believe. Like in a situation where like the U.S. owns the most Bitcoin and like forces you the policy on the globe, the U.S. leadership is still maintained. It's likely that the U.S. dollar stablecoin apparatus like is advanced through that, and like there's all these second order effects where you're just like, no, that has to be true. like even if one day the U.S. dollar disappears, I mean, you're still, because of the if Trump kind of weaponizes the stablecoin system, you're looking at like continuing the current system by like hundreds of years. I mean, that makes a real difference to like people's lives around the globe. Like that's a binary, like either something happens or it doesn't. That's just, to me, it just doesn't, it's hard for me to understand that argument. But yeah, I don't, obviously it's like pretty fascinating, right? Like I think it's good. Like one of the reasons that I became so much more bullish about Bitcoin early on is, and this kind of came during the fork wars, right? You saw like multiple constituencies with Bitcoin, like trying to force a different direction for Bitcoin. They were trying to do that at the technology layer. That's kind of stopped happening, right? It's at the social layer now. But that I think was a sign of like maturity. Like a lot of the other coins just like simply don't have that. There's kind of like just one group, and then you just either go along with the group or you fork, you fork off and you're on another coin. So Bitcoin has this, great diversity, within it. And I think that's like a strong sign that like Bitcoin is a much more mature technology than these other things where, And I think maybe this is happening with I don't pay enough attention to some of these other coins, but like, I mean, I don't get the sense that there's like a Solana culture that is like particularly diverse, right? It's like they're building web applications with tokens, and there's a pretty strong alignment there that they're better than Ethereum, and that's kind of pretty much it. Like, I don't get the sense that there's like a elaborate, philosophical disagreements therein. Like, maybe there's technical disagreements. Like in the case of Ethereum, right? It's all engineers kind of like debating technical things, but there's no like philosophical difference, and that kind of makes it like seem like intellectually kind of weak, I think.
I like where you're going with this. I mean, as far as I know, if we could have a magic wand and speak with Satoshi, maybe he would believe that a fork of Bitcoin was the real Bitcoin. Who knows? Like you said, there is a lot of space for interpretation out there. So one thing is to run code, and one thing is to fill the blanks, as I say, because people have different views, right? So we don't know. As far as I know, the only Bitcoin is the one that we agree collectively to establish and to mine and have nodes around it, and have devs building on.
I'm always super fascinated by these disagreements, and that's part of what drives my like work into the history stuff. Where I do think that there are, my goal with the history is ultimately to get to some sort of like long form kind of like book or something where you can kind of like figure out like who are the founding fathers of Bitcoin and like what specifically did they think, because their philosophical debates are like super fascinating to me, and they still, I was rereading recently like an old debate from 2014 that like was pretty much a replay of the kind of like Ordinals kind of season 2 sort of debate, and it was from Luke Jr., who has the same position that he has now, and then this guy named M.R.M Popescu, who's kind of like the father of Bitcoin maximalism, like in a lot of ways, and they were just having this debate, and even what you just said, like this the fine difference between like even amongst Bitcoin maximalists, like how you can think about Bitcoin, like so their disagreement was essentially at that time there was a very popular application that Eric Voorhees had created. It was called Satoshi Dice. So it was a gambling application that ran on top of Bitcoin. And so what it would do is like every time you like kind of rolled the dice, it would use like part of the Bitcoin transaction to determine like the dice roll, and it would settle that, and you either win the coins or not, based on how it did. So like, and it was so popular that it was just dumping like tons of transactions, right? Obviously, they were paying for these transactions, but then there was a bunch of transactions that were happening on the blockchain that the network needed to kind of keep track of and store. So Luke's whole view on this was, this is bad. They're not using Bitcoin according to the rules, like where Bitcoin is, kind of for peer-to-peer transactions. This is like kind of this company that's just outsourcing its data to Bitcoin, and the Bitcoin node operators have to pay for it. So we, the people who run the code, we, the people who have the nodes, like we need to stop this. Like we are Bitcoin, we decide, and like this is against the rules, so we should do something about it. And then the very fine difference here that I think is like super fascinating is M.R.M Popescu, who ran a early securities exchange. So basically, like Satoshi Dice was a public company. You could buy Bitcoin denominated shares of Satoshi Dice, and so M.R.M was the guy who owned the exchange that you could buy and sell these shares, these Bitcoin denominated shares, on. And he basically said, who's the we? He's like, there are no we's in Bitcoin. There are no groups. Like Bitcoin is the rules. You're either following the rules or you don't exist. Whether you have a problem with how this company is like making money or it's costing you money, that's your problem. like so basically GTFO was what he said, and I'm like, okay, like this is really fascinating. This is like you have two people who are probably like considered like the fathers of Bitcoin maximalism, who like believed Bitcoin was going to change everything, like change the world, like be the only cryptocurrency system. But like this like, one small disagreement, is so meaningful because it's like in one case, like you have absolutism, like Bitcoin is the rules, like no one can change it. It's like absolute. And then there's some sort of we, like we, the people who run the network, control the rules, and therefore we have to kind of maintain Bitcoin. Like there's a huge difference between those two things. Like there's so much commonality, like so much, like there's so much that they agree on, but then this one thing, and you're like, these are totally different. Like a world in which like Bitcoin operates on one of these principles versus the other is totally different, right? And I think I don't know. That to me is really fascinating because I like to kind of study like Bitcoin and how we got like our kind of interpretations of it. And I would argue that that's actually still a pretty prevalent disagreement. Like the people who are upset about the kind of Bitcoin season 2 stuff are kind of relitigating this argument. And we haven't decided that. Like there isn't a consensus on like who's right and that, or I think it's still open for debate, right? And so history, I think, can like unearthing some of the stuff, it can make these conversations easier because you have some sort of reference point. You could say, oh, okay, well, these people thought this, and we do this still in America, right, with the election. Free speech, right? Okay, well, what's free speech? Well, the founding fathers, this is what they thought free speech was. So Elon, when he goes out and he says this is what the founding fathers were, Elon's from South Africa. He's from South Africa. He's not American, in the traditional sense. But the American kind of history is so open source, like in some ways, that like you can go in there and you could say Elon can sort of claim, I'm doing this for free speech, and free speech is fundamentally American. Just think how crazy that is. Like you have a South African billionaire, like who's influencing American democracy. But the reason that he's able to do that is because we have preserved so much of this history so well, that he can actually you can have a somewhat nuanced argument, right? You can argue that it's maybe not super nuanced, but it's better than like nothing, right? Like it's better than nothing, and I think that's the role of history, right? And I sort of worry about a Bitcoin in the future where that history isn't super accessible, because a lot of it is so buried. Like you really have to go into the forums and like spend a tremendous amount of time like to find some of these things, or go on IRC. And yeah, for most of the average people, their version of Bitcoin history is like Satoshi. There was how. Maybe they know somebody created something called Silk Road, and then Michael Saylor. That's the history of Bitcoin to them, and that's fine. But I think that's the thing that I'd like to fill in the gap. I don't think that's a good way of looking at it. And I think again, history has like a utility in the present, and like the better we can have some of these conversations about the future, right? You're sort of limited by the past, right? There's the whole Orwell's dictum, like he who controls the past controls the present, controls the future, and I think that's very true. So
after all, we are seeing this in anything like religion, languages. I mean, at the end of the day, there is a lot of space for interpretation that creates maybe conflict or create different opinions on the matter, which I also find it super fascinating. But I want to ask you one thing. I came across one article that says owning one Bitcoin is better than being a millionaire on Bitcoin Magazine.
Well, I mean, it would be nice to have $1 million right now because you could have 10 Bitcoin.
I guess the trick is that you either or, right? So you can't use the
I would say if you
$1 million.
don't have $1 million, you probably want to buy the Bitcoin. But if you do have the $1 million, you probably want to buy the 10 Bitcoin. But it's still better to have Bitcoin now. Yeah, I think Vivek wrote that yesterday. Yeah, I thought that was pretty clever. I mean, obviously, I think that owning a Bitcoin, it seems pretty likely now that owning a Bitcoin will be probably one of the most unattainable things in the world. I mean, that's the crazy thing. I look at it now and it's like, if I had just not gone on one vacation, like I could have bought like a whole year of my life. Like it's just so wild, right? Like if you think about being in Bitcoin under $1,000, right? That's where I spend most of my time at Bitcoin. The trade is so crazy, like now, and you're like, wow, like you buying a Bitcoin was like buying years of life, like years of freedom. And if somebody had just told me that, just like I wish that we had known enough about that at the time, but it didn't feel like that. It didn't feel like we were missing out on something. Now I think it's like, yeah, the median income in the U.S. is like $60,000 a year or something like that. I mean, owning a Bitcoin is going to be a status symbol that's pretty hard to come by for the average person. So yeah, I think that yeah, I don't know if you're starting out now and like trying to get a whole Bitcoin. I have a lot of sympathy for like people in that group. I mean, it's going to take a lot of work, a lot of work. I mean, especially compared to the guy who just mined like 10,000 and just shut it off. The delta is just crazy, right? And then then what's the delta in 10 years from now?
I was about to say, yeah, exactly. I mean, it's not going to be as violent probably as it was, like you pointed out, because I strongly believe there's going to be a diminishing in the returns, right? But still, there's going to be people saying, oh, you're lucky you managed to purchase one Bitcoin for only 100,000. So God knows where we're going to where it's going to go, but there's not going to be that delta, like you said. Because
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, if the stuff like the strategic Bitcoin reserve happens and then nation states start accumulating, I mean, you're just, you're talking about. I mean, Michael Saylor's kind of laid out some bold predictions for Bitcoin, and I was actually funny. I was saying this at the 100K party, maybe to kind of like round it out, go back to the beginning. People were making predictions, and I was saying like, well, the nice thing about Bitcoin is that it's proven even the craziest predictions to be accurate, like given enough time. So if you make a prediction about the Bitcoin price and you're wrong, you just have to wait.
Exactly. So it's not the number, it's the time frame.
Right. Yeah. It's not the
I love
number.
it.
As long as you make a prediction about the number, you're guaranteed to be right. It's the time frame.
I love it. But Pete, man, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the channel. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your knowledge with us.
Yeah, appreciate that. Again, if anybody wants to check it out, Pete Rizzo on X, Bitcoin Historian, and then BitcoinHistoryNewsletter.com. We'll give you those kind of threads in a more condensed kind of email version. And it's kind of an open source project in some ways. If you're interested in like helping research and writing some articles and stuff, we pay in Bitcoin. And if you're excited about the Bitcoin history, feel free to reach out.
And guys, as always, in the description, you will find Peter Rizzo details, so make sure to check him out. I'm really glad we've done this together.
Thanks for having me, man.
We have a bunch of events coming in, so I'm sure we'll bump into each other again.
Yeah, I would love that. Get you on the live stream.
You have a good night. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.